KC Joyner, ESPN.com's NFL Insider, breaks it all down with us right now, Casey, as the Eagles lose for the second straight week. And I wonder, the first question I really have is, were there any tendencies from last week against Detroit that carried over into this week's loss against the Redskins?
The Eagles still have trouble covering crossing plays. If you give them traffic, if you give them pick plays and such, they're not very good, and they don't do very well against wheel routes. They do a good job if you give them straight line plays where you can just follow them and their corners. If you give them straight line plays where they can just go in one direction, that's fine. But if you put them through traffic or you give them to try and cover on angles and things, they just their defensive backs struggle, and teams I think are going to keep targeting them in those kinds of ways.
We saw a couple of years ago Jim Washburn had that wide nine, and when it's good, it's really good. They get to the quarterback. Even that year with Washburn, when they were not a very good defense, they did get to the quarterback. And when they're bad, they seem like they're bad in a variety of ways. You know, Schwartz was getting a lot of praise for 3 weeks. What's happened the last two?
Part of it's the running game, the run defense, and that's the thing when you got a wide perimeter like that, teams can run up the gut, and that's what Washington was doing. I'll give you a metric here. I have a metric called good blocking yards per attempt that measures how productive a ball carrier is whenever he's given good blocking. League average in that category is usually around 8.5 yards. Washington averaged 14.3 yards in that category yesterday. Some of that's the Matt Jones big play at the end, but even if you take that play out, which you really don't want to do because that was an important play if the Eagles stop them to get the ball back, but even if you take that play out, Washington was still in double digits in this category, and it just means that even when it's Philadelphia and not only that, Washington had good blocking on nearly 50% of their plays. So you want to be at 30% of your defense. So you're not stopping them. You're not stopping at the point of attack, and when they are getting good blocking, you're not keeping the plays down to a minimum. So it was a dual issue for the Eagles on the ground.
KC Joyner with us. Obviously, one of the big stories here last week was Vaitai getting the start at right tackle. He did not fare very well. Did the Eagles do enough to help him out?
I didn't think so. Early in he allowed that sack in the first quarter. It was just a one-on-one situation. And you're just wondering, because we talked about it last week. We're like, okay, well, they'll chip, they'll put a tight end over there. They're not going to leave him just hanging. They'll do something to help him out. And things are like right off the bat, they're like, no, we're not going to help him out. We'll just go ahead and leave him in a one-on-one situation against a good pass rusher and just hope he can do well. And again, it's why would you do that? Well, that's play calling, to leave him in that situation, because especially early in the game, you'd think you'd want to get him started off on get a good start, and then maybe after a quarter or so, then you leave him in that kind of situation and say, now we trust you. But the Eagles did the exact opposite.
Yeah, and as the game went on, Peterson kind of said today, look, he got his legs underneath him as the game went on, but realistically, he gives up 2 sacks, 2 hurries, a quarterback hit. That's a rough day for any guy. At that point, Peterson says, well, today he said he's going to start. He gives us the best chance to win. You got to imagine how bad is the next guy. But one of the reasons he doesn't want to do things, and you touched on this last week, is he doesn't want to move Barber out. He doesn't want to put Wisniewski in because then he's disrupting the line. You talked about continuity, but when you see a guy that struggles that bad, do you have to at least consider it?
I think you have to consider it. And the other thing is that we're talking about the offensive line, we're talking about the pass block, and the running game. Washington only had a loaded box, which means they put an extra person in the tackle box. They only had a person in the box on 8 plays yesterday. Okay, 8 plays. That's that's 26 out of 28 teams that have played so far in Week 6. That means Washington just said we don't need to load the box. So you'd think the Eagles, because they're not facing a loaded box, boy, they're going to be able to do really well against in the ground game. Because you have that continuity up front. That's where it should, one of the places that should pay off. Hey, we've got good continuity up front. We ought to be able to run the ball as well. Nope. The Eagles had an average. They had 8.4 yards on good blocking attempts. It's not very good. It's okay, but it's not very good. And frankly, one of their biggest runs came when Washington loaded the box, and they were able to break away and get a good run. So, you're not getting the bonuses out of having that continuity that you should have, and you've got the downside. So I think they might have think about a personnel change.
Yeah, the narrative was that Washington's terrible against the run. 5.1 yards a carry, 130 yards a game. Why did Philadelphia struggle to run the ball against this team?
Part of it was, the thing is, they got good blocking on a planned rushing play. They got good blocking on 10 out of 22 carries, nearly 50%. So that's about where they've been all year. They're 44.4% for the year. 38's the average. You want to be above 40. So they're doing well there. Their backs just aren't getting the gains. And what it was, I think, in this game was Washington's safeties were playing just far enough back where you'd say they're not in the box, but they were able to either read the play or get up quickly and keep those gains. So fine, you get good blocking. Now your running back has a lane, and now all he has to do is beat the safety. Washington safeties are coming up and making big tackles, which if you flip it over on the Philadelphia side, their safeties are doing a terrible job. I don't know what Malcolm Jenkins was doing on a play. I think it was in the fourth quarter where he just kind of waved at the guy. He had a completely clear lane to go get this guy and could have tackled him for 1 yard loss. Instead, he missed Jones. I think it was either Jones or Thompson, and he got a 7-yard gain out of it. I mean, and the Eagles were doing a lot of that where their safeties weren't giving good run support. So I think it's a big difference.
How much is the line's play tied to the game Wentz played? I don't think he played an awful game. I thought he made a couple of really nice plays, a couple really nice throws. He obviously took a couple bad sacks late and did not play his best game. But how much of that do you believe had to do with the pressure and the know-how that Vaitai was playing over there, that he was well aware of it?
If you know that you're getting, if the other team's only loading the box a certain amount, in fact, that reminds me of something that Michael Irvin said years ago. He said that another receiver came to him and said, and from the other team, and said, "Man, I can't get open. They're always double covering me. I don't know what to do." And Irvin said, "You've got to run them out of that coverage." When Washington's sitting back there and not loading the box, they're saying, "Fine, Wentz, go ahead and beat us throwing the football. We don't think you can do it, and we can stop your running game with our front seven." And they were stopping or keeping the running game in check of the front seven, and if you've got to be able to throw your way out of that. So I mean, it's one of those situations where you'll be able to run your way out of that. So it's one of those situations where you have to have that offensive line and those running backs start to get more gains. And I think I don't want to put a lot of it on the running backs, but that is some of it. Where if those backs don't start getting longer gains, because yesterday, even though again, loaded box only 9 plays. Only one Philadelphia player had an above-average good blocking yards per attempt. They're just not getting the big gains, and I think you've got to do something to either get the backs to hit longer gains or something, because until you can get the defense out of that situation where they're playing the pass, I think Wentz is going to continue to struggle. Well,
all right, then that goes to the question about the running backs. A lot of people have been asking, why not more Smallwood? Matthews has kind of been the guy. Does a guy like Smallwood fit this offense better?
Smallwood is his good blocking yards per attempt this year is around average, but again, last year in college he had a higher percentage of 10 or more yards on carries than any other FBS back. So he's a guy who can give breakaway plays. Sproles isn't doing very well in that. Actually, Matthews yesterday had the best good blocking yards per attempt. He had 10.2 yards per carry, which led the team and such. So I just think it's going to have to be everybody, because I think Sproles can hit those plays if you put him in the right situation. I think Smallwood can hit those plays, and I think that Matthews, if he can wear a defense down, can put in and get those kinds of plays too. But you've got to get more consistency out of there, because if you're only going to keep getting 7 to 8 yards on good blocking carries, I think the teams are going to just keep sitting back in coverage, and especially if you're getting that and when the teams aren't loading the box.
How important are the linebackers in Jim Schwartz's defense?
I think that they're part of the issue. The thing is, if you want to win front seven battles, because you can really stop the other team's running game in 2 ways. You can win a front seven battle and just beat the block in front of you, and that's either your defensive linemen or your linebackers, and then you can have your safeties come up and give support. Unless you have a safety blitzing or somebody extra in the box, but usually you're going to have them come up and run support and things. So I think if you're going to have the safeties play as badly as they did yesterday, and again they were very inconsistent, if you've got those kinds of problems, I think you have to have linebackers winning some front seven battles. And the thing is, if you're playing wide and you're trying to stop the perimeter plays and stop what happened against Detroit last week, now your linebackers have to make a lot more plays. They've got to cover a lot more space. So I think it's very important, because if they don't cover that space, now you're really leaning on that secondary even more.
We're talking with KC Joyner, ESPN.com, NFL Insider. The Eagles lose 27-20 to the Redskins. The penalty's a huge factor. Philadelphia, for the 3rd straight week, has been penalized double-digit times, 13 times for 114 yards this week, and that's a big problem. But they only scored on an interception return and a kickoff return for a touchdown, where 2 of their touchdowns. They had a lot of big issues on offense. Yes, Vaitai and the line was a problem, but what other struggles kind of were in there that this team was not able to put any offensive touchdowns on the board?
I think that they're not getting the vertical game going. Wentz also, he kind of, people have been talking about, he's the next Brett Favre, or that's some of the comparisons they made. Is he Roethlisberger? Is he Favre? He definitely looked like Favre yesterday, in the sense when Favre used to, during the first quarter of ball games, You'd see him rocking balls everywhere. All these rocket balls, all these overthrown passes and such, and he'd be really fired up and rattled. And the team would have to settle him down. That's that famous clip where Holmgren's talking and said, "No more rocket balls, please. Just calm down." I think that's kind of where Wentz was looking. You could see early in the game that he's just getting very intense, very fired up. And also, Washington has some coverage issues in their secondary. They've got players you can go at, but the only big pass they hit was against I think it was Kyle Fuller, a third-string cornerback for Washington. That's the only big play they hit. They weren't even trying that many big vertical passes elsewhere. And I know they don't have the fastest people, but Washington has people in their secondary you can go after. And if you're not going to try and go after those players, I think you're ceding that you're not. You're saying, fine, we're not going to go vertical, and again, you're not going to get the defense to play in the way you want them to, because Wentz has got to go vertical, because the defense are just going to take. If he wants to think and dunk, they'll let him do it all day long.
How much are the Eagle receivers a problem?
A fairly big part of it, but I still think a lot of it has to do with what you're doing in coverage and things. If you're asking the receivers to go beat coverages, that we're trying to take away the big play, I think it's you still got to find a way to hit those plays. But if you don't get the running game going, I think you're giving the receivers bad situations. It's a domino effect where if you can't get the offensive line to block better and you can't get the running backs to hit bigger plays, now you're asking receivers to do more than they should, and then you start putting more on Wentz than you should too. But I still think that he has to be a little more settled down, because the last 2 weeks early in games he's just looked very, I don't want to say rattled, but very fired up, a little too intense and things. You got to get him to calm back down and be like he was in weeks 1 through 3.
Real quick, Washington, they've won 4 in a row, and I don't know that anybody's really got them on the radar. Should we?
I had them after they lost their first 2 games. I thought there were so many issues they had on their team that it was going to be a problem for them. The big thing that's gone for them is their running game is now over 50% good blocking rate for the season. That's tremendous. That's an exceptional number, and so it's not just Philadelphia's having problems against them. As long as Washington keep that running game going, what we saw yesterday is going to be something they can continue to do, because their running game for the first couple games of the season was terrible.
Dallas, to me, Dallas is them in Minnesota would be a very entertaining game, the way Minnesota plays defense. But Dallas on offense is doing just about everything right now. And I love the one criticism I've had for Dallas, even last year, they were not a 4-12 talent team. They just had bad game plans, I thought. They're sticking to a game plan of feeding this Elliott the ball, and then when they don't give him the ball, it's opening things up for Prescott, and he's making plays. Dallas right now seems like if they're not the best team in the NFC with Minnesota, those 2 teams would be really entertaining on the field.
Yeah, Zeke is really good. I'm going to be writing something on Minnesota this week, the things that they're doing well and the things that actually they can even do better, because Minnesota's got some upside potential. I should post an insider later this week. The big thing about the Dallas game, though, the takeaway I got out of it, I did an article for ESPN's Insider section today. It was fantasy-oriented, but you can take some NFL takes out of it. Green Bay's vertical passing game, Aaron Rodgers is doing really badly in vertical passing, and some of it has to do with pass blocking and a little bit has to do with the receivers, but it mostly has to do with him, that he's just doing a terrible job at downfield passes. So Dallas's defense did fairly well yesterday, but I think a lot of that has to do with Rodgers, and that's something too where if Rodgers is no longer hitting on the vertical passes, if he's not doing as well as he did in past years, you're taking one powerhouse out of the equation in the NFC.
All right, last one on the Giants. Then they played Baltimore. Good game, entertaining game. If you're watching those 2 teams, Baltimore's going in the wrong direction. Giants got out of going in the wrong direction. What did we learn about the Giants in their win on Sunday?
If Odell Beckham can continue to hit those plays, when he's trying to impress the kicking net, so he can propose to it after the game, I think I think that's a big thing. Baltimore's secondary has really has some weaknesses. They've got some strengths, but they're thin. And you could say the same thing about New York secondary. Played a third-string free safety yesterday. I think they were able to win that game yesterday because Baltimore just didn't bring enough offense to the table. But if they don't get the defensive issues worked out, a lot of it has to do with injuries. But if they don't get them worked out, I just think it's going to be a long season for them because they've got offense, but they don't have the kind of offense. Shootouts are always a 50-50 proposition no matter who you are.
What are some things that impressed you on NFL Week 6 Sunday?
Jay Ajayi taking over the number 1 spot in Miami.
200 yards.
Yeah, Pittsburgh's defense looked terrible, but Ajayi last year he averaged 9 yards when he got good blocking. That would have been 9th among running backs if he had enough carries. And coming into the offseason, it looked like Ajayi was going to be a back who was going to be, he might even be an RB1 in fantasy football. It's going to be a bell cow. Adam Gase was talking him up in the preseason, and then some things came up, and he didn't even make the trip to Seattle in week 1. He was a healthy scratch, and now he's back, and it looks like Ajayi, he's got 2 really good matchups coming up, too, so I think we're going to see some more good games out of him.
You know where he was sitting yesterday?
Where's that?
Right on my bench.
42, same here, man.
42 points later, I said, what? This guy, I was watching the game, and I saw on the bottom scroll, Ajayi, 200 yards, and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Followed by 2 touchdowns. I was like, say what? Oh, my gosh. But
don't
hopefully.
sell him, man. Keep him. He's going to do it again, man. Don't sell him.
I hope so. I know Foster's coming back. A lot of interesting things from yesterday. Of course, Casey will be back on Thursday as we begin to preview Week 7. Man, we are flying. I hate this, man. We're going to be, like, next thing we know, we're going to be talking about the Thanksgiving Day games. And when you get to Thanksgiving, you're really in the nuts and bolts of the schedule. But, hey, tonight's very interesting. Arizona, the Jets, the loser, is realistically their season's over, right?
Yeah, probably. When you've got 6 teams in the playoffs, you've got a better chance. But I would think realistically they're going to be in a really bad way. And I think New York's in a tougher spot than Arizona because Arizona's just got a lot more talent. New York's got some talent deficiencies that have been showing up.
All right, KC Joyner's back on Thursday with a look at the Eagles and the Minnesota Vikings, the unbeaten Minnesota Vikings. We'll dive deeper into that on Thursday's show. Thanks, pal.
Appreciate it.